Here's the way it works now if you are a U.S. Air Force pilot getting fired by your commander-in-chief, Barack Obama, from the military under the don't ask, don't tell policy. Here's how it works. Whether somebody outs you or you out yourself, whether the accusation is true or not, your case goes to a review board. The review board makes a recommendation on whether or not you should be fired. And if you are a particularly high-ranking person being fired from the military by Barack Obama because you are gay, that recommendation will go to, if you're in the Air Force, it will go to the office of the Secretary of the Air Force. At that point, once the recommendation is received, the clock starts ticking. There's a 10-day period, a 10-day window for one of three things to happen. The Secretary of the Air Force can reject the review board recommendation and say, no, actually, this person is going to stay in. We are not going to separate them from the military because of this policy. So that's one option. Or the Secretary of the Air Force could accept the recommendation and say, yes, all right, we're going to kick that person out. Or the Secretary of the Air Force could do nothing, in which case the review board decision stands and the person still gets kicked out. That 10-day ticking time bomb has been ticking since at least a week ago now for Lieutenant Colonel Victor Fehrenbach. He and his lawyers learned that review board recommendation was at the office of the Secretary of the Air Force last Wednesday. We don't know exactly when it was sent there and when the 10-day ticking started, but we know we're well into it. And that means unless drastic action is taken, Lieutenant Colonel Victor Fehrenbach is in his last day or two of his decorated 19-year military career. But like he has told us multiple times on this show, he is fighting back. This time with a legal case to try to block the Air Force from firing him. It's on the front page of the New York Times website right now. Joining us now in his first TV interview since filing his lawsuit is Lieutenant Colonel Victor Fehrenbach, and he is appearing for the first time on this show with a lawyer. His lawyer is Drew Woodmansey. Gentlemen, thanks very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Rachel.
Colonel Fehrenbach, let me start with you. I know you received word last Wednesday that your case had been sent to the Secretary of the Air Force with a recommendation. Is it your understanding that that means the recommendation is almost surely that you should be separated from the military?
That is our understanding, Rachel, because the way the regulation reads, if the Personnel Review Board decided to retain me, then there'd be no reason for my case to be forwarded to the Secretary of the Air Force. The only reason it would be forwarded to the Secretary was if the recommendation was for a discharge so that he can either, like you mentioned, agree with that action by signing off on it or just letting it happen on its own, or he could do the right thing and apply the new enforcement standards and retain me. Which we still hope is the case.
And by applying the new standards, those reflect the new restrictive interpretation of Don't Ask, Don't Tell implemented by Secretary Gates. And you believe that interpretation of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell rule should have excluded you from being fired in this case.
Absolutely, Rachel. And when the Secretary announced these new standards in March, he said that they did apply to open cases, and my case is still open to this date. And each one of those factors that he announced applies to my case. And if they don't apply them to my case, then, Rachel, they don't apply to any case. So we hope they do take this opportunity to apply those new enforcement standards, and also, as my lawyer will talk about, the WIT standard, which is the law of the land in the Ninth Circuit. We hope they take the opportunity to follow the law and to follow the new enforcement standards that they themselves announced.
Well, Drew, let me ask you about that with the WIT standard. I mean, what's going on right now legally is that, Don't Ask, Don't Tell has been in place for 17 years. Its expected repeal is coming through the policy process, not through the courts. What is it that makes you think Colonel Fehrenbach has a shot at stopping this policy legally?
Well, Rachel, part of it has to do with the man's extraordinary record. The man's a war hero. He's been recognized by the Air Force as a war hero. And his service record is so extraordinary that the Air Force has zero evidence in the record that would warrant discharging him under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. The WIT case that Lieutenant Colonel Fehrenbach just referred to was decided in 2008 by the Ninth Circuit. Prior to the WIT case, the burden was on the service member to show that his remaining in the Air Force was not a detriment to morale, good order, and cohesion of the unit. Now, after WIT, the burden is on the Air Force to come forward with evidence and to meet its heavy burden of proof to show that retaining him would, in fact, harm morale, would actually harm the unit. And the evidence in the record is quite clear that retaining him is great for the unit. It's great for the Air Force. His 2010 officer performance report from February 2010 specifically said that he, quote, raised morale. And when you apply the Witt standard, and against that record, it is clear that he should not be discharged under this policy.
Drew, what do you think is the likelihood that a federal judge will step in and actually injunct the government from separating Victor from service at this point? They would have to actually stop the government, stop the military from doing something it seems like it is steamrolling toward doing.
Rachel, it's always hard to give percentages on these things, and it's hard to predict with certainty. However, I have great faith in the court system in this country. When an objective member of the judiciary takes a look at this with a fresh eye, in light of the Witt standard and in light of this man's extraordinary record of service to this country, I'm highly optimistic that we'll get some relief and at least have a window of opportunity where the status quo is preserved until a full hearing can be held on this with all the evidence that the court wishes to hear, so the court can make a determination on a full record. But we're asking the court in the meantime to preserve the status quo, to allow him to continue to serve his country until a full hearing can be had.
Well, Colonel Fehrenbach, the last time that you were here on the show, you said that you and your legal team had tried to arrange essentially a meeting between you and the review board so that you could make your case, but that request was denied. What would you have wanted to say to them if they had given you that chance to defend yourself and your record?
Just as Drew alluded to, Rachel, to present my record, but then also, again, to stress to them that certain aspects of the law, as it stood, when I went to my review board, they were not followed by the Air Force, and certainly the new enforcement standards applied, as well as the Witt standard. Even before my first discharge board in April of 2009, we actually had a preliminary board hearing, and we asked the Air Force to use the Witt standard in my case, and they refused that request. And in fact, when it came to that one prong of the policy that said, whether I was detrimental to good order, discipline, morale, and unit cohesion, the Air Force proved nothing. They brought nothing to that discharge board. All they said was the law states that as fact, and that presumption that the law is based on is false. So I hope that if we're successful in this injunction, we don't just help my career where I'm able to deploy again and to serve 20 or more years, because that's all I wanted to do these last 23 years is to serve my country. We hope this helps other pending cases and other cases that fall under these new enforcement standards. We hope to help everyone out there that is going through this process right now.
Victor, nobody right now says, nobody will argue with the sort of outlook that Don't Ask, Don't Tell is on its way toward being repealed. We know what that process would look like in Washington. We understand that that process is essentially rolling toward completion. Certainly other things could happen, but everybody believes the policy is on its way toward being repealed. The president personally looked you in the eye and told you that this would get done. Do you think it's conceivable, from your experience in the Air Force, your experience in the military all this time, would it be impossible for the president to just stop implementation of the policy, to hold implementation of the policy until the repeal process can be completed? Couldn't he just do that?
I've read several reports that said he could use an executive order. He could also use stop-loss procedures. But what the Service Members Legal Defense Network and other organizations are promoting is that we do need the change to Don't Ask, Don't Tell. This law was enacted by Congress, and the only way to get permanent change and a permanent solution is for Congress to repeal this law. But that doesn't mean that we don't need presidential leadership and courage here. We definitely need the president to step forward and to lead this fight to end this discrimination, this unconstitutional law.
Lieutenant Colonel Victor Fehrenbach and Attorney Drew Woodmansey, thank you for joining us this evening. I understand that time is of the essence and things may happen very quickly right now, both in the case and the proceedings with the possible discharge. Please keep us posted on the outcome, you guys. Thank you.
Thanks,
Absolutely,
Rachel. If I could just add, it's my mother's birthday today, and I just wanted to tell her a happy birthday, and thanks for all the love and support, and I love her, and I wish I could be there to celebrate with her.
As if people didn't love you enough already, Victor. Really? You had to put the cherry on top like that? Thank you, and happy birthday to Victor's mom. Appreciate you guys. Thanks.
Thank you, Rachel.